what strategies do you have to share? Is anybody posting any
Yeah,
to share?
we had a question, a similar question, just worded differently.
Okay.
And of course, I knew this one, we all knew this one would come up, but these folks want to know if anyone has hosted a live online town hall meeting, and since social distancing has started. So if so, what were the barriers? And I don't know if anybody responded there.
We are in Greensboro. We're going to be doing that next week. We have not yet done it. We've been doing some virtual programming each day at 1 o'clock from a programming standpoint, but we will be attempting to host a virtual meeting next Wednesday. We've actually got a meeting this afternoon to plan for that, but it will be we'll be doing that through like Facebook Live, and the plan is to do it at kind of 2 different intervals of time. One in the middle of the day, and then one at an evening meeting, 6:30, and then do comments through kind of the Facebook Live comment section. But we haven't yet actually done it, but we're going to be doing it next week.
And we have held stakeholder meetings digitally. And it was a meeting, we had held a series of them. So we did 2 in person, and then 2, we needed a transition to online. And I think the biggest challenge for us is it was very short notice, and we weren't 100% familiar with the tools that we had, but that's where the lessons really came through for us about needing to have ways to capture that data and to use multiple methods for engaging people. And as Charlynne just demonstrated with her graphs from y'all's input, most of those online survey platforms do have ways to immediately process and display your results. It might not be quite final document form, but it gets the point across. And so that's a little bit of a way to get around that.
Dixon says that she's advertised public meetings on fast food boxes. Lauren, do you want to talk more about that?
For a master plan for the town of Zebulon, and we're able to put flyers on the local pizza place and the local, I think it was an Arby's fast food restaurant. And so they put at the Arby's, they put them on the trays for people, and the pizza boxes, they just taped them onto the top of the pizza boxes as long as we provided them.
Oh, nice.
So it was a way to get, especially with more people doing takeout now, if you can work with your local restaurants, I think they might be willing to help you as long as you provide them with what you want put on the boxes.
That's a really good.
If people responded using that method?
I believe we had that as one of the questions on our survey when people logged in. We asked how they heard about it so that we could track, we had put signs out near the park sites and other major trafficked areas so that we could kind of start to figure that out. But we did the same. We tried to limit those surveys so we didn't get too many questions.
Yeah.
Strategies for web-based community engagement. I think we all, and I'd be curious to hear from others if anyone has thought of any non-web-based strategies. I think going back to this idea of the vulnerable populations, especially these are often pieces that are incredibly important to a community engagement process that we all work so hard to reach normally. And now we have even more barriers because we can't interact face-to-face with those individuals. So, those are your younger kids, perhaps your teens, looking at the social vulnerability indices, people with language barriers, lower socioeconomic status, non-car households, people who don't have internet or who don't have computers, how can we maybe use, and this, you know, we're going back to the early days of mailers here, but we found that that's one way we can continue to hear from those people during this time specifically. So has anyone had a good experience with non-web based engagement strategies?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, even right now we have the census is out there, and I think they've done a great job this time of really, well, they always push it a lot, but you get the mailer where you can fill it out, but then they give you a link if you prefer to do it online. So you have kind of both options on there.
We've also heard of some public input consultants who have the ability to receive text messages. So that's another way. It's not as grassroots. It takes a little bit more technology. We've thought of potentially, advertising in public places and then having a phone call type center. That probably is a lot of legwork for an individual to be recording and documenting the comments, but equally important to hear those voices. Using some sort of GIS crossed with demographics to identify where some of those vulnerable populations are, or again, working with your local, quote, tour guides for some of those populations. Those are the things we've thought about to date, but again, we're really interested.
It's also, it still involves technology, but this is also a great time to engage people through pictures and art. And so people can submit pictures of things that they like, or they can draw pictures of things that they like and take pictures and send those to you via email or something like that. If like a Facebook or something like that is not an option.
Let's see.
We have someone commented that Mentimeter is a great programming app for getting people's input, and it can create live word clouds based on people's responses.
Got my mouse back working. But yeah, so I'd like to, kind of consider this opportunity. So, we have Zoom, which we're using now, or similar web conferencing formats. There is an option to do polls with this, so you can set up questions ahead of time and poll all your participants and do those. Even for meetings, I've used some like WebEx with meetings with an advisory board before, where everybody had to call in. We couldn't meet face to face. This was years back when we had the travel restrictions. So people were, this was a national group, so nobody could travel. So we had to have our meeting that way. But we were able to kind of poll and get everybody's input on that as a voting mechanism. Synchronous versus asynchronous. So right now we're synchronous, but also think about those recordings. So can you, like in education, we call it course flipping. So you record the lecture, and then your meeting time is discussing. So people watch that, and then you can have a meeting like this where you actually have discussion and follow up on it. So you can have people that way, they can watch the recording, or maybe you have a podcast or something, and people can listen to that, and then they have an opportunity later to engage and provide feedback. Online surveys, we've talked about those. What are considerations? What do you need to ask? Think about what the questions will look like on the back end. Do a sample, or share it out and have some people test it. Make sure they understand the questions. Sometimes it makes perfect sense when I write a question, but somebody else is like, what are you talking about? My staff does that all the time to me. So, share it out there and get feedback, and then also look at what the data looks like once you get it. Because I know Elizabeth was talking about that. How do you categorize the data once you get it and make it useful? We can always share examples. So some of our questions, now how does this opportunity, what's the future of public input? I don't think it's bad to go back to ways where we're doing mailers and getting things, especially if that connects to people that we haven't been talking with. But is this going to have people more used to using technology? Maybe we can use that tool a little bit more. And if anybody has any thoughts on what they think the future will be, please let us know. The other question I asked on the survey was, who are potential departments that may be able to assist you? So a lot of people said planning. You have GIS, the tax office. Kind of varies from town to town, but they're a wonderful resource. Rachel mentioned a couple of times that vulnerability index. So a lot of times your planning department or your tax office, if they're running the GIS software, they may have those resources and tools. So then they can, go talk to them. They can probably provide you with some of that information if they have that data available. It is, there is a cost to that. So, larger departments may have it, or larger jurisdictions, but even in rural areas, check those, see what access they have and can provide. And years ago when we were just starting with GIS, I would always tell the parks folks, go talk to your tax office. They have GIS, they can help you inventory things. Because in my opinion, they probably get pretty bored with cadastral mapping of your tax parcels. So, and they're usually your users of your park, so they'd love to get out there. Communications, Greensboro talked a lot about partnering with their marketing department, and I think we have some marketing folks online with us today that joined in. So, let them kind of help or coach you if you know someone that has those skill sets on how to present things. Economic development. Again, a lot of communities that I've worked with in the past in trying to get information about parks, especially with trails, it wasn't always the parks department or the planning department either. And so a lot of these kind of more tourist areas, they might have the economic development department that had a lot of resources. Because they're promoting recreation in the community as part of the economic development. So that's a good one. And I think most everybody responded about community partners. So who are some community partners that you're using out there? You can type it in, or if I can find my... See what's in the chat window.
Christy
here.
Ross says REI is a community partner.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Chris, you were State Parks, right?
Christy, you can feel free to unmute yourself if you would like.
Okay, hiking and biking clubs. Yeah, meet with those partners, find out, who are the groups, your target audience that you can't meet. Is there someone that's a resource to them that you can develop a relationship with and help spread the word and help them champion?
So REI is based out of Greensboro and Raleigh and Wilmington. So they've hit, and Charlotte, so they've hit the major metropolitan areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do great promos. All right, and if anybody has any others, you can just put them in the chat box there. Hang on. Here we go. Is that my next one? So everybody's talked about technology and what's available and what's not. So I was looking at, I saw some articles this past week because at the university we've had to go. Everything's online now through summer school. But this broadband, and this is at the lowest speed where it is. So the darker, there's more coverage that you can see. And this is just, is it available? And this is from North Carolina broadband.gov. You can go on there and they're promoting. So you can look at it by, who the vendor is, if it's Verizon, if it's Charter, who's there. But this is just that if it's available. Hang on, having slide fun here. But there's access and connectivity. So Leslie Bonney is the director of the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State, and every year they meet and they're like, what's happening in North Carolina. So they do a lot of research, and the connectivity and broadband access is one of the things that they talk about. So they still say that 18% of North Carolina households have no internet access, and it's disproportionately located in the rural areas. And I know a lot of people that join in today they're serving a rural community. So what does that look like? But the other piece on this is this next one, when we talk about, access, it's available, but do they have access? They say that more than 40% of North Carolina households where broadband is available don't subscribe because they can't afford it. So the infrastructure doesn't help if you can't afford to use it. And I think that goes to some of the social vulnerability and maybe folks that we need to reach out to. But right now, I know in this time with this pandemic going on, a lot of these companies, I know Spectrum and others, are providing internet access for free to households with teachers and kids that are in school, so they don't go without internet. So maybe now is this opportunity where, while people have that, maybe we can connect with them when we haven't in the past. Might be, a small window to get some information, or at least introduce it. And I know even like my mobile provider said, give me extra gigabytes of data over the next month for a mobile hotspot if I need it. So, some of the cell phone companies are doing that. So I think there's some opportunities as well. So now some of the other questions. Public input documentation for grants. Was there anything on any of the other before I will answer a few questions on this. And I see Christy's also added that, they partner with grocery stores. Or can we partner with any grocery stores? Like Lowe's Foods? I think those would be good opportunities as well. All the essential services. Go to the ABC store. There's places. All right. So a lot of people started asking questions right away with PARTF. So if you're doing PARTF and LWCF or any of our grant programs, and probably other grants, I'm doing the ones that I'm familiar with, public documentation is required. So did we have a public meeting? And now folks had to cancel meetings. The applications due, in a month. What do we do? So I want to look at what's required. What if we can't hold a meeting? We use a different method, or how should you document this process for the grants? And I will tell you that the Parks Authority has met and discussed this, and this was a concern when they talk about the score isn't the only thing that goes into awarding a grant. That's kind of the starting point, but they will look at, and I think everybody knows the situation this year. So we have public input versus public meetings. So you have meetings that are open to the public to gather input, but that's can be different than like an official public meeting or a hearing. So some things are required to be a public meeting. So like when your local boards meet, the city council, county commission. And for a legal perspective, the UNC School of Government had this blog post in March, is a public meeting required? If it's a board or governing body meeting, is there board action required? So those were a couple of things that, let's see if I can pull this up, that have information. And, and I will mention this, but I am not an expert on the legalities of this, and my internet, I'm testing it today. So they have a lot of things they're talking about, what does the governor's order mean? Does it mean things are waived? Can the boards meet electronically? So these are all things that discuss with, if you need to hold a public meeting. What's available, is a quorum present? How do you document it? By public, you can have meetings, but then for the public, if it's supposed to be a public meeting, how can they watch or observe and give input? So those are all legal things to be, to take into consideration at this time. Even asking, if the board can take action if some members are participating remotely. And I know, for example, I was talking with Nate Haluka with Grants, the Parks Authority, when they meet like this, where it's remotely, he's in touch with their legal staff. So, does your community legal staff can let you know if that's required, or what counts. So so this is one that you can look at. I will put this in the chat window right now, and everybody can take a look. So it should be in the chat window if you want to look at this. And canceled, when are things concerned, and what can you do, or what do you need to do? And again, I'm going to turn most of that over to your legal folks. On this, let's see. All right, if I can change slides. So for the Park and Recreation Trust Fund, it's a public meeting. So this isn't like the official public meeting. There is one that the board has to approve, verify this is the project we're submitting, we're going to commit the funds. But in the scoring system, it talks about having a public meeting. So the applicant conducted a public meeting exclusively for discussing the PARTF grant project and obtaining comments within the past 2 years. So if you've done it in the past 2 years and it's for the project that you're applying for, and you had support, then you can do that. So this just, documentation, public meetings, what describes the means that you advertised it, Facebook, websites, community announcements, minutes, discussion. So any type of documentation of recording the results of that. And if, for example, say you had a meeting that had to be canceled because of this, document that and put it in your application. And that's fine. So the authority is going to take into consideration all of that this year. So they know that might be an issue, and it will not be held against you. Basically they do not want anyone to be discouraged from applying. Please apply and don't let that deter you. Let's see. Civic groups were the other part of the scoring, which I think might be impacted by this. So, have you presented it to 2 or more local groups and received support? So neighborhood association, youth association, advisory boards. So that's just, you've presented it. You presented the project. You have an agenda or some other correspondence. So maybe you had a Facebook Live meeting or something like that. You can document it that way. And just say, or if you had some canceled, describe what you did, and if COVID-19 impacted it, put that in there saying how it was canceled. Maybe you had it all advertised, but then we had to cancel it. So those are certainly things that you can document. The advisory board is the other one that might be impacted by this when I look through the scoring system. So, is there another way you can present to your advisory board or another similar group to get a motion of support? So that one might be a little different. If you need to get a motion, is it an official meeting? So it might depend on how your board is set up for your community. Those are all different. And that might be going back to some of the school of government.